Welcome back to the What's Working Building Leaders report. And this is the section where we dive into each chapter in a bit more detail to provide some commentary and maybe highlight a few things which you may have missed if you just kind of read the actual report itself. So this chapter, which you can see behind me, is all about what is the type of leader that is actually needed in infrastructure and construction. And so we looked at the research fundamentally, and that's what all of these different types of things highlight. So fundamentally, if you actually go and research this and go and ask 40 clients, 48 consultancy firms, and 32 contractor firms, this is the results you get. So you see that clients think that effective leaders in this industry are all about decision making. That is the number one trait they need to have. If you ask consultants, they think you need to have leadership and motivation. And if you ask contractors, communication is no doubt the number one that you need to have. And if you were to aggregate all those across, you actually get this full list, which you see here. And we found this a super interesting research paper, which we hope you really, really enjoy. And you can see over here, the number one characteristic or skill that on average that you need to have in this industry is decision making. Number two is communication. And number three is leadership and motivation. Arguably, that's communication as well. Then you've got problem solving, you've got time management, organizing, planning and goal setting, technical knowledge, financial management, quality management, listening comes pretty far down the list, which is quite interesting, delegating, and then you've got negotiating, which is very interesting, right? If you think about that. And I'm sure we could sit here and deliberate and kind of discuss whether that research has got it right. What do you think? What do you think is the most effective or most important skills in the industry? If we go back one slide, these are the top three by clients, consultants, and contractors. So certainly one which will be an interesting one to kind of share around the office and see what people think. The next one here is really talking about challenge, right? This is where when we lead training programs for leaders, the number one thing we hear that people want to be when it comes to leadership or the type of leader is an inspiring leader. What the data would suggest is that actually the type of leader which is required in this industry is one who can challenge. Now, you don't want to be this type of leader who just challenges everyone all of the time. That isn't going to work. But what the statistics and what this study of 288 employees in an engineering firm found is that if you do challenge people, actually the result is they work harder and 4 times more engineers exerted extra effort when challenged. Staggering statistic. And if you want to look at what were the traits which kind of caused that, you've got those here. If the people felt intellectually stimulated, that was the number one in terms of getting people to work more. It kind of input more effort. You've got people of high charisma, individual consideration. That is really about people who can feel they have a leader, which is personalizing the information to them. So if you're just kind of blanket, just do this. But if you're saying, hey, Jimmy, I want you to do this because of your career and what you said to me in terms of your goals, if you've got someone who's actually individualizing for each person, then you can have a very effective input or uplift in outcome performance. So emotional intelligence accounts for more than 85% of exceptional performance in effective leadership. That's a really interesting statistic. Then we found that 416 construction execs agreed leadership intelligence was the predictor of an effective leader. Of course, the next question is, what the hell is leadership intelligence? It's stipulated here. It's a strong positive correlation. It's this bit. A leader's ability to inspire, stimulate, motivate, and care for followers, create and present convincing visions, solve problems, and generate solutions. Arguably, what you'll find, and this is what we found in the research, that description of intelligent leadership is very similar to transformational leadership. Someone who can also care, but it can also challenge at the same time. The next thing here, construction workers, when this kind of speaks to this transformational leadership piece. So we found that when you look at the data and the literature, the most effective leaders are the ones who can inspire, absolutely, challenge, absolutely, care, but also individualized as well. Those are all kind of four key characteristics of what a talented transformational leader is. Now, to individualize, you need to be a thinker. And this really comes back to that intelligence piece. If you look at the other piece of research, this was an Australian effort. So it's an Australian academic. She reviewed 22 different papers and looked for common themes in this sector. And this was specifically to do with Construction 4.0, which is about the integration of technology and all these different kind of AI as an example into the world of construction. What does the construction and infrastructure sectors look like once we've actually done this? That, the colloquial term, Construction 4.0. And they found that cognitive, so the ability to think, is going to be the defining characteristic moving forward. And most importantly, actually, was actually this, the tolerance of failure. That's what they found. So the construction industry in general, infrastructure in general, is fairly risk averse. When things go wrong in these industries, it's usually really bad news. So tolerance of failure, tolerance of risk is usually quite low. However, if we're going to integrate these new technologies, if we're going to embrace new ways of doing things, well, our tolerance for failure is going to need to improve. And they highlighted that top one as actually a key characteristic of effective leadership. Not to mention these other criteria here, so business knowledge, interpersonal capabilities, and then strategic. All of these are super important. And what we found moving in these is that, but cognitive is actually the number one. Now, as Construction 4.0 matures, leaders should have a greater social awareness, encouragement, persuasion, and trust-building competencies than usual, as leaders have a high probability of interacting with a wide range of stakeholders in the digital age. And if any of you have worked on a construction site just recently, you'll know what that means. You'll know that that really means you're interacting with lots of different people. You might be interacting with subbies, people from council, government, maybe independent verifiers, your team, external people. Crikey, the list goes on. And that is what makes leadership in this sector so challenging. So moving quickly on, successful leaders have about 4 leadership styles, and there's a whole mix. But if you put them onto a spectrum, you could say that the 2 ends are transformational on one end and then transactional on the other. Now, what's in the middle, and this is a really important part, laissez-faire or passive avoidant, depending on what you talk about. Passive avoidant is basically a leader who observes, but fundamentally doesn't do anything when they receive stimulus. Not that they don't do anything, but they don't take a proactive, or they often let things slip. A good example, which is really easy to understand. What if people are late to your meeting as a leader? What do? Is it okay? Passive avoidant leaders would completely let that go. No worries, all good. They just keep quiet. What it shows, though, is that if you do that, and if you do not challenge your team to work out whatever they need to work out and be on time, you're actually setting yourself up for failure down the track in the long term. And that kind of really speaks to this part here, loyal followers created by challenge. We're seeing kind of common themes here. We're also seeing transformational leadership again. This came up lots and lots in the research. And if you're in an industry or a company which is trying to accommodate or kind of bring more women into the sector, they found specifically that women respond better to transformational leadership styles than men. And so if you're trying to keep people, if you're managing women, developing your skills, capabilities in that area is absolutely critical. We'll keep going. That was a quick quote about how it's good for business in terms of you make more money. Companies with more effectiveness in their leadership are actually 3.5 times more likely to produce better shareholder return down the track. Active listening, again, can reduce stress. I'm going to flick through some of these. 800% more effective. That's the highest performers in a role compared to average performers. So really is about producing a high performance workplace, because what does that mean? Well, arguably, you could actually get away with a lot less people if you've got high performance. And there's a couple of people or a couple of organizations, Goldman Sachs is a good example, where they kind of bring this attribute to the fore, where they look to pay people 2-3 times the salary of a normal quote unquote person, because they know that they get the output if they are really, really good. Key one here, this is probably an older study, but very important. Motivation. What do you know about motivation? Do you know that there's those three key things which cause motivation in others? And you'll notice on there, it's not money, right? Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If you're a manager or a leader who does not know those three intimately, well, guess what? Your team are most likely to not be that motivated because you can't help motivate them or help them tap into their own motivation. So key thing to jump into there, employee engagement. Again, if you've got a manager who focuses on their strengths, we found in the research that it actually boosts productivity. It boosts their likelihood to enjoy their job. And of course, if they like the job, they're more likely to stick around. So helping boost retention and solve a number of different business problems. So this is kind of coming to the end here of this chapter. And this is the summary slide where we kind of try and capture the essence from the research. Who is an effective infrastructure leader? You could be like this lady. She builds people. She's an adaptive communicator. She values team. She has a stakeholder first mindset. She uses influence in the right places, highly competent at their job, strong character, and loves their organization. Fundamentally, if you can produce leaders like that, you are going to have one hell of a culture, one hell of a company, and a phenomenal place to work. And the last bit here, mindset. What is it to be an effective leader or have a leading mentality in the construction space? Well, safety and well-being, commercial, personal performance, someone who really cares about performing really, really well. They need to really care about their team performance, understand messaging, so know how to effectively communicate, and stakeholder focused. Understanding that ultimately, in this space, there's usually some very large players who are pulling the strings, and understanding what they're trying to achieve can help make your life much easier. So we'd be really keen to hear, have we missed anything? Is there ever a study you've come across, some research, which you think we could include in here, or is missing a big hole in our research? We would love to hear from you if that is. If not, let's dive straight into the next chapter.